20 years ago, I was building tree stands out of 2x4s, and like the landowner would be like, "Hey, saw your tree stand up there." Like,
he's like, "Want a beer?"
Yeah, like they didn't care, right? Now that because.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Deer Grow.
Man, it's almost food plot season, Jared, and Deer Grow is one of those products that has really changed the way that we plant food plots and the success we've seen from them.
No doubt. I've been, trying to plant food plots my entire whitetail hunting career, which is a little shorter than yours. But the minute that I started, or that I realized that I could get Deer Grow back into some of these remote plots where I couldn't get lime or fertilizer, especially in the 50-pound bag, format. Mm-hmm. So everything was changed. I could get into these spots moving forward with a backpack sprayer, and that's since escalated to these 40 or 60 gallon sprayers, and we're doing upwards of 5 to 10 acre food plots just with Deer Grow and having phenomenal success.
Yeah, and I mean with the price of fertilizer, lime, diesel, everything this year, I mean what better way to get in there and grow a successful food plot at about a third of the cost? Check out Deer Grow at deergrow.com. And we're back.
Ew.
HUNTR Podcast, episode 104. Coincidentally, sad day. It's the last day of November.
Yeah.
November 30th.
I'll try not to be doom and gloom on this one. It's a tough time of year for me.
I know.
I
feel like I need to console you.
The night is a very dark time for me. It's dark for everyone, you idiot.
I'm sure we'll get into it because you had some rants this week.
Oh, not rant so much as it just, what's the definition of an idiot? As somebody who speaking to me.
Yeah.
To somebody who does the same thing over and over again and expects a different result.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, the gun seasons are tough on our property.
Yeah, they are. We talked about it, I guess, a little bit yesterday in that, I don't know. I did read, it's November 30th, so gun season's been underway since Monday. Today's Wednesday, so a couple days.
In Ohio.
Yep. Pennsylvania started on Saturday.
And youth the Monday before.
Yep.
I think Monday. Could have been the weekend.
Saturday, Sunday the before. Yeah, 19th, 20th or something like that. So I saw this morning, Ohio DNR put out a report of there's been 17,000 deer, I think, were killed on opening day, which is 4,000 lower than last year, but still 1,000 above like the 3 or 4 year average, which makes sense. We talked about it, and we'll get into it a little. I didn't hear nearly as many shots as I thought I was going to hear on Monday.
I'm curious where that news cycle got its, because the guy's
where was that out of? Cleveland? I don't know. I found it on YouTube because it was posted up at the top feed.
The guy had bleached hair, and he's like, the deers in the woods and the fields are getting hunted with guns.
That was a terrible news report. So anyways, Jared and I found this YouTube link, and it's I think it was out of Cleveland, talking about opening day of gun season. And I will give them credit, is they spun it to a discussion you and I have had probably on this podcast, which is essentially, we talk about this, 6-day gun season or 7-day gun season. But really, the archery season is taking the lion's share of deer every year. That's what the report said. Yeah. And so, flip it back to what I was reading this morning. I think archery season took 89,000 deer up until Sunday, obviously. 17,000 on Monday. I think youth took 9,000 on the Saturday, Sunday, the weekend before. But they're still saying that the gun seasons plus the 2-day gun season that happens in later December and then the muzzleloader season in January, archery season in Ohio will still take the majority of deer throughout the entire year, which I think is an interesting thing because I don't think I would have ever guessed that. Because I think in Pennsylvania, it's clearly gun season. Gun season clearly kills more deer than any other season.
I don't know if that's correct in Ohio. I thought that gun was still killing more, but they've seen a big increase in archery because of I don't know why what they were attributing it to.
Crossbows?
Well, but crossbows are not new in Ohio.
No, but I think they did say that COVID participation was through the roof. So I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was 340 something thousand licensed hunters in Ohio. That included residents and non-residents, which frankly is not as many as I thought, because I know Missouri's in the 500,000 range. Pennsylvania's north of 700,000, I think, still, give or take. At one point, we were at like 1.1 million. So if you think about that, like 350,000 hunters in Ohio isn't that many.
No, yeah, you're right.
35% of the harvest is gun hunting.
Yep.
That's insane.
Yep.
I mean,
as opposed to what they're saying is 40 years ago, it was all gun.
Well, and again, because if we're thinking about 340-some thousand licensed hunters, I would assume the majority of those hunters are gun hunting. They may archery hunt as well, but they're gun hunting. And so for them to only take 35% of the share, I mean, what do we attribute that to? Is it just because so many more people are more successful in archery season, with crossbows and corn pals, and just corn pals in general, compounds and corn pals?
I think that archery hunters are, or, I should say, a lot more deer are getting killed during the archery season just because of advancements in technology, not only of compound bows, but of
crossbows.
You could say in Pennsylvania, the introduction of crossbows, but in
Ohio.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how.
Well, if you think about crossbows, like,
how long have people been hunting? Like in a state in Ohio, like I don't think crossbows were that good. Like,
yeah, well, that's what I was gonna say.
10,
I mean, at some point,
ago.
you had literally like the recurve bow type limbs of like the Excalibur crossbows. Like I think we all can remember those, and I'm sure that they were good, but you didn't have magnification scopes. You were shooting open sights. Like there were a lot of things that the advent of modernized crossbows and probably cammed crossbows has only been 10, 15 years old.
Yeah, I mean, because I can remember like guys our dad's age talking about, man, if you could kill a buck every year with a bow, you were really doing something. And that probably speaks to like the state of the deer herd at the time, but also, like I said, the quality of the equipment.
I think the equipment's probably a huge play in that.
Because think about that now. Like to hear that now, it's not hard to go kill a deer with legal archery equipment.
Well, even think about in Ohio the gun sight. We were talking about it this morning. I mean, we'll talk about it here in a second. But Carter shot his buck with a straight wall cartridge, 450 Bushmaster. A lot of people are using, I think it's the 350 Legend. But these kind of straight-walled rifles are now legal in Ohio when traditionally they haven't been available or legal. Before that you were using muzzleloader, or most people were using 12 gauge and 20 gauge. I mean, right? That was the gun of choice. And so again, with the enhancement of technology, and let's even call it more liberalization of gun opportunity, that you can use different weapons. We talked about these muzzleloaders now that are shooting 500-600 yards, some of these custom muzzleloaders. The efficiency of weapons has dramatically increased. Whether that's in the archery side, I mean, 20 years ago, your dad and my dad would have never taken a shot past 30 yards with a compound. Now there's plenty of people out there shooting 50, 60 yards with their compound at deer. Ethical, debatable. And same with probably a crossbow. Like I would assume 15 years ago, those crossbows were good to 30, 35 yards. Now, I mean, people are shooting Raven crossbows to 85, 90 yards.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter which method of harvest we're talking about. All of the technology's advanced to where a hunter, if they know what they're dealing with, is more lethal, because of the equipment that they have.
100%.
And I think that's probably where, back to you and I talking about some of the frustrations of this time of year, is things like corn pals and bag limits and everything else have not evolved. Season dates haven't evolved. Technology has. So if you're a hunter who cares about the whitetail deer resource, how can you be okay with certain rules and bag limits and things like that not evolving over the last 20 years, yet we all know that technology has made us more efficient at hunters? Like those two things don't add up correctly.
Yeah. It's hard to put your finger on, because some of these things that, like, I think we might have issue with are not necessarily new. While the technology is improving, I mean, the two essentially would be the two that you could look at, like the things that kill deer would be, like you said, liberalization of weapon of choice, and in my opinion, baiting. But neither of those are new things. You know, as far as I know, baiting's been legal in Ohio forever.
We talked about that. I don't know one.
It always has been. And then on the weapon of choice thing, we talked about, they're getting better, basically, and that's one thing. But I mean, dude, personally, I think that those corn piles or baiting in general, I should say, is a bigger issue.
Well, I mean, look, here's a great example. You just looked at a little bit of data there, but we're only talking Ohio here, but you probably can apply it to other states. You know, probably 15, 20 years ago, the majority of deer harvested were done by gun in the state of Ohio, with a smaller portion of that done by archery equipment. Yet corn piles and baiting and everything were still legal, you know, pretty liberal hunting seasons. Now, fast forward to this year, archery equipment is killing most of the deer. Gun is not. It has to be the advancement of technology. And I would assume the increase of participation maybe because of that advancement of technology. There's probably more people with archery tags or archery capable, weapons than there were 20 years ago. But that's because of the advancement of technology. So again, the question to some of the state agencies is, how are you going to let technology advance and liberalization of weapon of choice advance, but not change things like baiting, bag limits, maybe even season dates to some extent? Because the more efficient we get with those all things staying constant, the more deer we're going to kill and take out of the herd. Where's the balancing act?
I guess that's why, I'm saying it's a hard thing to put the finger on, is because these things that seemingly have not been an issue for so long are being, in my opinion, now taken advantage of legally, in a way that's not advantageous to deer hunters in general or the deer herd in general. Like, it just seems like within the past 5 years, we've figured out that we can, dump a bait pile and shoot them with a crossbow at 50 yards pretty easily. Like, and I just don't think that was ever a thing, whether it's because, just from where bow hunting evolved from, that just was never really a consideration. Baiting in general has always been a big ethic. Probably we talk about it pretty freely now, but I mean, dude, we know guys that have had TV shows and stuff for years that are like, well, I don't really want to mention that we're, using bait. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Like, now we just speak about it. Like, I mean, because we do, like, we're open about it. Like, we're not trying to hide anything that we're doing. But for a long time, guys were like, well, it's legal in this state, but I don't really want to. I don't want to put that on my show.
They put the corn pile behind a down log or whatever. Yeah. And clearly, like, this deer's eating a corn pile. Like, what the hell else is he eating behind a down log? I think what's interesting is so flip that switch to a state like Pennsylvania. So we opened up on Saturday, and we had our Sunday hunting as well. A couple, I think, unique things and takes that have come out is, I think this is the third year of us opening on a Saturday, when typically we opened up on the Monday, same as Ohio did. And there's been a lot of kind of chatter, I guess, recently about the effectiveness of that Saturday. Like, should we really open on Saturday? What advantages is that giving to us? And then I think finally, for whatever reason this year, people started talking about the fringe impacts of a Saturday opener, not necessarily in a positive side, but in a negative side. And what I mean by that is, Thanksgiving's on Thursday. Typically, people are staying wherever they're at on Friday. The opener's Saturday morning. Normally, people left, Friday morning for deer camp to go to the North Woods or wherever, and spent Friday, Saturday, Sunday, small game hunting, sitting around camp, telling stories, whatever. And then Monday they hunted, and usually Tuesday they would hunt maybe in the morning, and then they'd go home. Now, these people are out doing Thanksgiving family stuff on Thursday, and it's like, well, do we really go to camp Friday to just hunt Saturday? Like, that seems rushed. Some people, like myself, I usually travel to Kentucky to visit family, so I don't even get back until Saturday morning. I miss the opener morning basically every year now because it's just I've got family commitments elsewhere. And so that's one, is like, is this really benefiting? And then number two is the impact on the economy in these smaller, especially northern communities where, Friday there would be how many people that would flock to, Elk County, Cameron County, the northern tier of Pennsylvania, Bradford. And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, visit these local bars and restaurants. And this was tradition. It doesn't happen anymore because Saturday's the opener deer season. Everybody's out hunting on Saturday. They get back Saturday night. Most of them are freaking exhausted, right? And they go out and do it again on Sunday. You're not going to go out and get lit Saturday night when you got to hunt Sunday morning.
I'll never do that.
Yeah, never do that. And so I think that from what it sounds like is a lot of these northern tier counties, and I'm sure it's other counties too, but these local establishments that for a long time have been benefiting from Monday opener, having all these hunters in town Friday, Saturday, Sunday are literally falling apart from an economic business side because the hunters aren't there. They either don't come up anymore because it's rushed, or they come up and they're purely hunting. They're not out there, with the community and doing things and at the bars and at the restaurants and stuff because they're hunting all day Saturday and all day Sunday. Then they go home because it's like, well, I've already hunted 2 days. Am I going to hang around Monday? No, I'm going home. So I think this all, whether you're talking about Ohio, Pennsylvania, some of these other states, and we've hit on it in the past with some of these states opening gun seasons during a rut, which, correction, we found out Wisconsin's, I think, is the third Saturday, not the second Saturday. But even still, these states are managing for opportunity. And an opportunity of harvest, basically, and hunting opportunity.
So it is. Opportunity at what?
But here's where I think they're failing, and maybe it's because they got tunnel vision, is, dude, there's a huge impact on the community in these areas that, you're affecting greatly by making changes, or in some cases, like let's take Ohio, maybe the effectiveness of archery season is so good now that we have a dramatic decrease in the amount of gun hunters who then aren't there to contribute economically to these communities during gun season because they're like, my hunter killed my deer back home in archery season. I don't need to be there anymore. And this trickle effect is absolutely affecting people. And I think hunters and people who've been in this tradition and are experiencing this and who have seen both sides of it are starting to, come out of the woodwork and say, hey, maybe we need to think about this. And I'm not saying necessarily make it harder, but you probably have to take off the blinders and start to see what the impacts are across the board versus, well, we're just providing more opportunity. Because that's all they're saying. We're just providing more opportunity. That's their goal, period. End of story. And that resource is limited.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I'm not sure what to think about it. Because, it really does. I mean, I guess I'm speaking from, a fairly limited regional approach. I mean, I just see what happens on our farm. But it's, guys are bow hunting, and, guys are crossbow hunting. That's not anything new. Guys kill them over corn piles. It's, it's not easy to do,
It's not a guarantee.
But it does seem like every year, I think we're 6 or 7 years into being on this place. It's like once you get to that opener of gun, like at this point, I mean, I've been optimistic in the past, but at this point, it's just like, there were some 3 and 4 year old deer in the past few years that I would hope have gotten through, and I don't know that any of them ever have. And I think that the reason for that is that, I can go out there and dump, a bait pile, a corn pile. You okay?
Yeah. Wrong pipe.
A couple days before season. Anybody can do it. It's legal. And I can sit 60, 70 yards away from it with a straight wall rifle cartridge that, I just can't think of anything easier to do. I don't think that's hunting.
Well, and I think that this is where...
And that's where these good ones get killed. And, dude, I mean, the examples that we see here recently... And, I congratulate those guys that are doing it. Like, it's legal, and you figured out how to do it very efficiently. I can't blame the hunter for doing that. But I know... and we experienced some things just here recently. It's like what you can do basically is if you have, 2 or 3, let's say landowners who are cooperating with each other that together own, 2,000-3,000 acres, maybe, have potential to do something. And if, like, let's say they're not baiting, maybe they have food plots or standing grain or whatever it is, have done property management, hinge cuts, burns, whatever it is. A guy that owns 20 acres or maybe even has permission on, like, a guy's backyard that borders that can go out and dump a corn pile and will inevitably pull deer right across the line.
100%.
And they can get shot. And it's their legal right to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But the shame of it, and like, I think where I'm frustrated with the situation personally is that, like, do we all have to, quote unquote, stoop to that level? Is that a necessity now for us to shoot deer of a quality that we want to shoot? Knowing that, and the thing is, like, as a private landowner, I'm fully in favor of, people should be able to do what they want on their property. But I'm also convicted by the fact that it's a public resource, and it's having a very direct and drastic effect, what you're doing on your private land, on the public resource that roams other people's private land.
I think what's so interesting about it is 100, because everybody listen to this, you're going to have half the people right now bitching at you that, like, they've done it, it's their right, it's legal. Yeah.
I've done it.
But then you're going to have the other half, and it's purely cultural, right? So let's take the...
and let me, clear the air first. Like, I can't blame anybody for hunting over corn piles or shooting deer.
It's legal.
I have done it. It's legal. I'm just, like, at this point in my hunting career, and, like, just the perspective that we've gained in talking to people that hunt in states that you can bait, and having done it ourselves, I think at least I'm starting to feel like, hey, that's, we're not ever going to, see a quality of deer herd that we want to see with that in place.
Well, I think, again, maybe that ties back to this whole increase in the efficiency of the weapons we're using. So take Kansas, for example. Kansas is one of those states that has plenty of deer space, had for years, been a mecca. And I'm not saying that it's not anymore, but again, corn piles, we went back and researched it. In 2012, they did a limited run of crossbow availability for youth and seniors. And then immediately in 2013, legalized it for everybody during archery season. And if you talk to any of the locals, so to take our opinions out of it, if you talk to any of the locals, the herd has dramatically decreased in quality. These are guys who have lived there their whole lives, who would drive around.
And I think when we say herd quality, the main thing we're speaking to is age class.
Yeah, age class, right? Yeah, older bucks in the age class.
As guys who want to shoot big bucks, which not everybody does. That's totally okay. But it is possible. Like, I think for everybody that wants to hunt, to be able to achieve their goals in deer hunting while also sustaining it for,
Well, and it
for everybody.
But I think you're always going to have people, whether it's kids or people new to hunting or people who just want to kill a buck. There will always be people who will kill whatever first buck they see, or they don't care. They just want to kill a buck, right? And then you've got a group of people who, let's say, are just even meat hunters. Like, maybe they'll kill a buck, but they also shoot the first doe that they see. Then you've got a group of people who have an expectation and goal, and everybody's goal is going to evolve. Like, you've got people that probably are looking to just kill a 3-year-old because they never have before. You've got other people who only want to kill a 5 and older because that's the goal that they've set out for themselves. Some of them, like an Eberhard or Andre, have purely a antler score in mind.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody's at different phases. I've been there. Everybody that has, been hunting long enough, hopefully is evolving through some type of a like your like we say all the time, your goal should be evolving or whatever, or based on, the opportunity. But that right there is what I'm struggling to stomach on my own farm. There is, like, the what's possible. I know, just from having experienced, and as, like, you're a biologist, we know that deer are not fully mature until they're like 6 years old.
Yes.
And that's just the reality. That's not like an opinion. Like, a deer's life cycle is, whatever they show, 60% at 2, 75% at 3,
80% at 4,
80% at 4. And it's not all about antler potential. It could be fairly taken the wrong way to say, like, hey, all we care about is the antlers, because that's definitely not true.
But from an age class maturity
From an age
standpoint.
class, I mean, we've circled the question of like, man, what is it that makes us want to hunt these animals at a certain point in their life?
Mhm.
It definitely has to do with the antlers,
Sure.
but it also has, I mean, I think a lot to do with the difficulty of killing a deer like that.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
And where the legs get swept out from under, like me on my farm, bring it back to this situation, is that they become, they become much easier to kill before they reach that point. I mean, dude,
Yes.
so few deer. I mean, I'm gonna say it's 1 in 100 makes it to 6 years old.
We were talking
at our
about that.
place.
I mean, just what is the rarity nowadays of a deer? Because I mean, they exist. I mean, we see giants all the time getting killed. We see mature buck. I mean, that's why we go to Kansas. Is that there are, even though maybe it's not as good as it used to be per the locals, there are definitely more mature bucks per square mile in Kansas than there are in Ohio, and for sure than Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Well, but back to what you were going to say about, our friend in Kansas who does a ton of shed hunting every year, who I don't know, 5-10 years ago would have picked up how many?
He said that he was picking up 60 to 70 sheds a year, and of those he would call 10 whoppers, meaning, and this is a guy that, I mean,
So 30 or 35 deer.
we're talking 75 probably plus inch sheds is what he's calling a whopper. So you're talking about 160 inch deer.
So 5-6-year-old or older deer.
Exactly. And this past
And
year,
this is Kansas, you know, so it's
this past year he picked up 100 sheds, so more, and 3 were what he would consider whoppers.
yeah.
So again,
So in terms of scale, I mean, you got to reduce it. I mean, that's 1 out of
one every 50, basically. 1 to 2 out of every 50.
Yeah, and that's Kansas, a state that has larger land tracts, has
But what we've seen is
restrictions on number of hunters, has
But even with a restriction in the number of hunters, we have seen a dramatic increase in pressure there, not only from out of state, but from in-state. One of the things we talked about from our Kansas recap, I think the last podcast, was I saw more Kansas trucks hunting public land than I've ever seen. I mean, normally that's where we see guys like us, the out-of-staters, the people who don't live there. There's a mad rush, I think, not to classify people from Wichita, but in that area at least, there's a lot of people leaving from Wichita coming to that area to hunt.
Wichitanians.
And so I think as you start to look at that, and the other thing, just like in most places, is a lot of these landowners who own, fairly big tracts of land, maybe they're cattle guys or whatever, are recognizing that there's an income source in leasing their property. And most of the leases are going to out-of-state guys, right? I mean, and we're one of them, right? So I'm not
Right.
throwing us out of that. Like, we're one of the people that are leasing. But, to put it, and maybe it's a pat on our back, but to what he said from us, he's like, yeah, but guys like you all who are leasing property have an expectation of, what Kansas can be like, so you're not killing the first 3-year-old 140 you see because what that deer could be like. Whereas some of these other people who are leasing from out of state, and it's no knock to them, but like we met some guys from Florida who, frankly, if they see a 140-inch deer, that's the biggest buck they've probably ever seen in their life.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you blame them for shooting it?
Mm-hmm. You can't.
You can't. And so I think that, and again, kind of to wrap that up on the Kansas side, legalization of crossbows in 2013, the COVID epidemic literally increased, I don't even know how many hunter demands in most of these states, at least through 2020, 21, and maybe trickled into 22.
Oh, dude, I will say, too, to the public land thing, because we've talked about it a lot, I think, leading up to this hunting season about, opportunities that are out there and stuff. I've talked to a lot of guys who are, hang their hat on hunting public land, and they're good at it, and they really enjoy doing it, even in states like Iowa.
Yep.
And not a single one of them, I think, is happy with like the number, the pressure that they've seen this year. I think every single one has been like, yeah, I don't know, dude, it's just overrun.
There's too many people. It is a limited resource. If we're talking about space to hunt, if we're talking about deer to harvest, both of those are a limited resource. There's not just plentiful space. And that's where, I get it. It's a law of averages for a lot of these agencies and stuff. But
Well, but maybe it has more to do like with what you're saying. I mean, I don't think Ohio is necessarily any different from Kansas in that a lot of private land is probably getting leased up. I don't know the percentage, guys in state, out of state. I mean, whatever.
There's a greater percentage of out-of-state hunters in Ohio than there are Kansas because of the limitations. But I will say it's not as much as I thought. In fact, they ran through some of the license numbers. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and I think Indiana and West Virginia. Those are the top 4 states, obviously, surrounding Ohio. But, I mean, even that was like maybe in the neighborhood of 20,000 out-of-state hunters. And I would say Kansas is probably... 25, 30,000. I don't know what that exact number is. And there's obviously more than that. But let's even say it's 40,000 in Ohio. That's not a huge difference in the number of out-of-state hunters.
So which one has more?
Ohio would.
Yeah.
And that's because it's not limited by a draw.
It's a lot smaller state, too.
Correct.
Probably quite a lot.
Well, and a lot less deer space. Like when we talk about state size, that's one thing, but think about the population of an Ohio versus the population in a very rural state like Kansas. There's a lot more deer space in Kansas than there is in Ohio.
Yeah.
So again, land is a limited resource. Deer are a limited resource.
It seems like, I don't know, it probably isn't, but it seems like a solvable problem. Like, I don't know. And the reality is not everybody cares enough about getting deer to 5-6 years old. In fact, very few, probably even see that as a possibility. I think if it's like one of them deals, if you took a poll of deer hunters, just a general poll, you'd say, hey, who would like to shoot a giant buck? It would be most people.
There'll be some people that lie, that say like, "Oh, it doesn't matter to me. You can't eat the horns."
Maybe, yeah.
You're full of shit.
So I don't know. Maybe it's
everybody daydreams about killing a big buck.
Yeah,
it's just I don't care if it's the first time you ever sit in the woods. You daydream about killing a big buck.
At some point, I would think that you have to.
Yeah, I think you're lying to yourself if you say that you don't want to shoot a big buck. That's like saying, okay, a 4-point walks out and a 170-inch buck walks out. You'll shoot the 4-point because you don't care. No, that's not true.
Yeah, but I think that does come with just understanding. A first-time deer hunter who doesn't even know. They're like, it would be cool to see a deer. Like, those people are out there.
Yeah, depending on their background and what their exposure to.
But that's what I'm saying is like a lot of this I think comes with perspective on the sport. Like for us to try to convince a group of Pennsylvania guys that hey, deer aren't mature until they're 5-6 years old. They're like, I thought they died at 4.
Well, I mean, yeah,
there definitely is a lack of perspective, and it's not anybody's fault. It's just we've never seen that here.
Well, and I think that's where the management of expectations is so critical because I would guess that most hunters would have a hell of a time passing a 4-year-old buck.
95%, maybe more.
Yes. And regardless of state. I don't care if you're in Iowa and you've got 600 acres of private land, a 4-year-old 170 walks by. That's a tough deer to pass.
Yeah, and I'm learning the hard way. It's like, man, if you're one of those guys that will pass a 4-year-old in places where nobody else is passing 4-year-olds, be prepared to be disappointed.
Sure.
Because it's a weird feeling when,
yeah,
like literally what will happen, in a state like Ohio, like I said, where you can have straight wall cartridges, you can hunt with guns. The neighbors will go out there and they will dump corn and they will shoot your 4-year-olds.
Yes.
Not your 4. They will shoot those 4-year-olds.
Yeah.
Those corn piles will draw them off of, of other properties there. And that's
in any state.
That's just the harsh reality. But it does seem like, man, if you could remove some of these mechanisms that make deer so easy to kill in this day and age and somehow educate people on what deer could be, what deer hunting could be.
Yeah.
It's 2 years away,
Well, and I don't know if it's even removal as much as it is modification. Because, again, the advancement of technologies and weapons has increased so much in the last 10 years, yet a lot of the season dates, a great example.
Can we just say that? It's fair to say, I think, that like if you have, it's easy to kill deer now. Right? Anybody can do it. I mean, we've got kids, elderly, handicapped people that can go out and anybody that wants to kill a deer could go kill a deer.
With like literally you just want to kill a deer, period.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's still like I will give
As opposed to like what, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago,
it was not easy.
It was not easy to kill a deer.
Yeah. I would say that at least in the last 3 seasons, so since 2020, I think public land guys have had it very rough. Not saying that it was easy before 2020, but the amount of pressure that is being put on the limited resource since 2020, I don't care what state you're hunting, has been immense. And immediately that's going to cripple your odds at being successful. Or you're going to have to manage your expectations a lot lower than you want to be successful.
And do we think that the two main things that would be putting pressure on public land in most states would be, one, number of hunters in general?
Yes.
Or just whether it's total number of hunters or time in the woods by introduction of crossbow seasons or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And 2 being maybe some of this like loss of private land, to leasing.
Yes, both of those. Access, because public land's always available, and absolutely, I think more liberalization of seasons to be able to hunt is more time in the woods.
The
and
leasing
more pressure.
thing frustrates me too. Not that the leasing is inherently bad, and like certainly I am in favor of paying a land. I mean, if that's something that they want to do, but like
that's a sensitive subject, man.
Well, but I guess what I'm saying is I have seen and we personally have wasted so much money on bad leases.
Terrible.
That's what happens is people just have in their mind that like, wood's good, like deer live in the woods. And so, I mean,
yeah,
I've said it before, like, dude, my uncle used to lease, I mean, it's
cattle.
It's pasture ground. Like there's no deer there, and guys are paying whatever it was, $25 an acre to lease it. And it,
dude, I will say this.
Why?
Think,
and they're driving from out of state. It's like, the effort that goes into hunting is not small, and so maybe I'll eat my words when it comes to saying deer hunting is easy. To kill a deer is easy.
I don't know.
It's relative, you know what I'm saying. But dude, I know how much effort we put into trying to kill, a 4 or 5, 6-year-old deer. I think it's evolving. And it just seems there are some things that like just really sweep the legs out from under you. Whether it's finding out that your trail camera is only sending 10% of the pictures, finding out that the lease you paid $5,000-$10,000 for is pretty much worthless, finding out that the neighbor can just go dump a corn pile and shoot it with a straight walled rifle at some point. I mean, it's like, dude, in terms of like the way we want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it just seems less and less attainable.
And this is something not to like bring the depression down on people, but I'll pick on you for an example here. And it's because I've had some discussions with people here in the last couple of days. As these gun seasons happen, and listen, everybody's got a tradition. I'll get into one of mine here, which was a really cool experience. And you and I have different backgrounds on gun seasons and traditions, but you effectively in Ohio as of this year had ballpark 2,000 acres essentially under control?
Yeah, not just for me to hunt.
Sure.
But yeah.
For a family to hunt.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yes. And friends.
Extended family. I would say on that 2,000 acre, there's 7 or 8
guys.
Yeah.
What I think is eye-opening to you and I, because...
And I will say that leased ground that I mentioned a little bit ago, that's pretty worthless, half of it is that.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think what's eye-opening to you and I is after like having some bad experiences on leases, it's easy for us to say, well, let's just go and buy our own property. Like we'll just own it and we'll change it. Here's a great situation.
It's not easy by any means. I still haven't done it.
Well, but what I'm saying is you have a lot of land, what most of us cannot afford because it's a family property that's been in the family for a long time.
No doubt.
And you still can't, quote unquote, protect a lot of the deer you would like to see make it through.
Mm-hmm. Well, and yeah, a lot of these deer that I'm talking about are getting killed on much smaller tracts of land.
Neighbors.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and the difference though is, in case in point, I could easily go dump a corn pile and shoot them with a straight wall. I know I could.
Sure.
I know the deer are there.
Yep. But you don't want to kill those
But
deer.
I don't want to. That's not hunting to me.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm saying like there's this moral dilemma, and my uncle and I have like 2-3 hour long conversations about like, he's older than me. So I mean, he's Frank, he's on a straight timeline, if that's the way it works out. He's got less years of deer hunting ahead of him. He's kind of resorted to, well, if you can't beat him, join him, basically. And I'm hard-headed, so I'm just still very much not willing to believe that it's not possible. And so that's where my
well, and again, I think it comes up on the cultural background side of, if you've got people who have grown up in, let's say, Kansas, Kentucky, Ohio private land, baiting is just part of hunting. It has been for most of the people listening to this in those states for the longest time. Now, if you grew up in those states and you only public land hunted, no bait.
For some reason,
right?
though, it's taken off. Like guys are using it a lot more, and I think it's the pressure from like realizing,
Is it leasing too? Do you think
sure.
it's doing it?
Sure.
Because I mean,
it's all of it. I think a private landowner in Kansas probably at one time had spots on public that were just as good as private, and probably didn't really have to use corn piles to be successful.
Well, see, what I was wondering is, let's say back in the day, and I don't know,
but
right?
a lot of that's gone away, because of pressure on those areas, leasing on the private, and and guys baiting on it, and guys flocking to public to do it. So now they're like, well, I just have my last stand here of my 40 acres, and it's still a good 40 acres, but if I'm not baiting, the neighbor's going to, and so it's, what good is my 40 acres?
Well, and that's where I don't know, like, at some point where baiting was legal prior to leasing, right? When it was just, hey, Joe Farmer, let, whoever come and hunt. And there was still a moral respect of, you knew who was hunting there and where. My guess is those people didn't
Which is pretty much gone these days.
Well, my guess back then is most of those people didn't go and just dump a corn pile somewhere.
It's got me fired up, Nick.
Right? Because it wasn't your property. You didn't know who else was hunting it. So you didn't just go dump a corn pile out there because you didn't control the property. It wasn't yours to lease. It was somebody else's. You were there by permission, as were 5 other guys or whatever. But now, if I come in and lease that same property and I have control of it, I'm going to put corn piles out there because I'm the only one out there. Nobody else is just going to go and hunt my corn pile or something.
Wouldn't you agree, though, that just the just the opinion on baiting has dramatically changed in the past, like, not even 5 years? I can literally remember, like, whether it was on TV shows or, guys that just we would talk to, it was kind of a, hey, don't ask, don't tell type of thing about whether you're baiting or not. Well,
I mean, I grew up only hunting in a state that you could not bait, to where baiting was cheating.
Yeah.
That was my cultural background growing up.
And today, granted, I'm sure there are still people who feel very strongly that baiting is
I would say a lot of people in Pennsylvania listening to this feel that way.
Like crossbows in the archery season, it's much more widely accepted these days.
Yes. And I don't know why. Privatization?
Downfall of humanity.
Well, so case in point, up here on the mountain where I used to do a lot of my hunting, Scott killed a buck up there on opening day. What did it have? Belly full of corn. Is there any cornfields around there? No.
Not really.
And I mean, we've been dealing with that same thing year after year after year. Like, legalized or not, I'm not saying that it's as widespread. Like, I think Rising joked about it in the wintertime. You fly over Ohio and it was like little piles of gold everywhere.
Not a joke, dude.
Yeah. But I say that because in Pennsylvania, it's not that bad. But case in point, there's still plenty of people baiting in Pennsylvania.
Right.
There's plenty of people that will go out and buy a bag of corn and a deer block and put it out there and literally think that they're not doing anything wrong. They have no idea that they can't do that.
Well, and unfortunately, I don't think it's as easy as, a law.
We can't enforce it. There's not enough enforcement.
Yeah, it's not enforceable, and I don't know. I mean, I'm in favor of small government. I mean, it's not necessary. I don't want the government's hands in our deer hunting stuff, but
the only thing that is going to remove baiting across the board is chronic wasting disease. And it has in certain. There are certain counties north of Columbus.
Where do I get some of that?
That you can't bait, right? And because they have disease management units. So I mean that is the only
since you bring
thing.
him up, Rising mentioned at that time in those counties he saw an increase in the age structure and quality of deer
because it's harder to kill them.
Right.
Yeah.
I do want to talk to you on. I've seen some comments of guys saying that corn piles are the same thing as food plots.
Negative.
Yeah, I mean,
they're not.
Fair. I see your statement. I completely disagree.
They're not.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree more. I think.
I mean, if the weather is shit, my food plot fails. There is no food.
Well, yeah.
It doesn't matter what the weather is.
Feel
I
free
could
to
put out.
Tack on to this. I mean, first things first. I think that there should be some barrier to entry for all of this, for hunting in general. The fact that anybody can go out and kill a deer, and I'm not saying it should be financial or based on any of your.
You're saying competency
wise. Yeah, competency. You should
won't happen.
Whether it's from a legal restriction or just literally
there is age,
or from a parenting perspective,
age.
Like that's where mine came from. As my dad or my uncle set an expectation for me to say, listen, you have to be able to.
So let's stop on that because I think that is a good point. There is an age restriction for hunting.
Okay.
The other thing,
what is it in
Pennsylvania? It's 12, but you can do mentor hunting. So like Carter and Harlan mentor hunt with me earlier than that. That wasn't a thing until
how early?
Whenever.
Any age.
Yeah.
3.
Baby. Pull the trigger.
Okay.
This is an interesting twist, though.
I have an issue with that because that's easily taken advantage of.
Oh, absolutely.
Here, this is my 3-year-old boy's tag.
Oh, yeah. No,
he shot this.
Well,
deer.
so in Pennsylvania, at least, 7 and under, I have to give them my tag. Mm-hmm. But over 7, they get their own tags. But here's where I think it's really gone.
Lay down a tag for your son.
Here's where I think it's really gone wrong on the competency side. All of us that are hunters listening to this thing, we all did one thing. We took a hunter safety course, right? Mm-hmm. You can walk into any frickin' Walmart in this country with a driver's license and buy a hunting license and never have to show proof of your hunter safety course.
Is that right?
100%. Because they don't have the competency to ask. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, have you ever bought a hunting license in South Dakota? No. Here's my driver's license. Great. Do they ever ask? They ever ask for proof?
You have to show them a driver's license? You don't even have to do that to vote.
Yeah, no shit. Just to show them, just so they have the information to fill out my tag. But think about that. When we were growing up, for the longest time, I think Emily still carries hers. She has a hunter safety.
Yeah.
We all had to take it when we were, I think I was 11 when I took mine in Pennsylvania. We all had to take that. Carter will have to take it here at some point if he wants to graduate out of the mentor program to have a normal adult or junior hunting license. But think about, when is the last time that you walked in and didn't buy it online, right? But you walked into a Walmart or Dick's Sporting Goods or whatever, gave them your driver's license, and they ever asked for proof that you took a hunter safety course? None. It's gone. Yeah. That is your level of competency that I think every state listening to this has failed miserably at. Mm. I mean, I know for a fact when I buy my Kansas license, they ask for, do you attest that you took a hunter safety course? Yeah.
Right.
What are you going to do? Say no?
Right.
There is no background check on competency of hunting.
Yeah.
And I know people are sensitive about that because they don't even want background checks on guns.
Well, and it's not,
but it's a competency thing. That is the competency level that we have removed. In 1990s, in the early 2000s, you had to show proof of that shit. You were not getting a license. I remember walking into Walmart with my old back tag from Pennsylvania and say, here was my license from last year as proof that I was able to get a license this year. You don't do that shit anymore. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That's a failure. That is the failure. That is your barrier to entry that we are completely screwed on moving forward.
At least from a safety perspective. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you would hope that during a similar or the same, type of process that, people will get educated on, the goals of the state from a management perspective.
That was the whole point of
listen,
hunter safety
you guys are about to join, a community of hunters who are striving to do X, Y, Z, and if that's.
In fact, some states had bow hunter education. There were certain states that you couldn't.
They definitely did.
You couldn't get your license for archery unless you took a bow hunter education. It's gone. Mm-hmm. That is your level of competency that for some reason we've just said, forget it. As long as they have a driver's license, that we'll give them a hunting license. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
You bitch about a car being a weapon. What about when you put a gun in that person's hand?
Yeah. Well, dude, I mean, frankly, the reality is that there's a lot of people hunting that should not be.
I guarantee they don't have their hunter
safety
course. I see it
all the time. I see the way people are handling their weapons. I see the way that people are, just the way that they talk about deer hunting, I can just tell they don't understand, the way that the shots that they'll take. Like, it's no wonder that, like, I mean, dude, if I had to guess, probably, I'll bet it's 50% at least of the deer that get shot at get away.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Hoyt Archery.
Dude, where would we be without our Hoyt bows?
Probably shooting crossbows.
or a Matthews, yeah.
One and the same.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, we love being Hoyt guys because you stand out. When you're in this room full of other people that shoot these other types of bows, I feel like the Hoyt guys just stick out.
Dude, it's just a legit bow. I mean, especially that carbon riser, man. I mean, I know that they've got several other aluminum lines as well. But for me, I'm shooting that RX-5 in the carbon model. They've since come out with the RX-7. And I can't tell you how much I love being a Hoyt guy amongst a sea full of Matthews guys. So we're out there, I think, proving them wrong, shooting 80 pounds and, killing stuff.
Hey, man, if you want to get serious, get Hoyt. Part of what we try to do with this podcast is start debate and discussion. And I'm sure there's plenty of people listening to this that have different opinions. And I'll tie that back in with like my background. I grew up, I started bow hunting when I was 13. You couldn't start hunting till you were 12 in Pennsylvania at that time. But every year, right after Thanksgiving, we would go up to deer camp, to rifle camp. And we would spend Friday, Saturday, Sunday up there. Monday, we'd wake up. It was opening day of rifle and hunt. Monday, Tuesday, would hunt through, the weekends and stuff. And I killed a few deer with my bow, but most of the deer I killed before I was in my junior year of college were with a gun, I would say. And so, growing up having that deer camp tradition and stuff was really important. And what I think is kind of weird, tying back to that economic discussion we had, is there was a report on the news the other day that, obviously you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand, like, the number of deer processors in this state has decreased dramatically. Like, it's almost hard to find a deer processor in an area where it used to be, it felt like there was, multiple in every town. And like, even one of the guys who has I think a pretty established one up in Beaver County, so in our whitetail territory, he's like, this year, statewide, it was buck doe wide open again in Pennsylvania, which it hadn't been like that in a while. Like, it was, first week buck only, then doe, and they've just been testing this thing back and forth. He said, there's too many deer for us to take because of those things being all done at the same time, to where we end up having to turn people away and not take any more deer. And we're losing money because if it was a gradual increase, let's say it was buck only the first week, then buck doe or doe after the season like it used to be, he's like, we could take so many more deer because we could methodically process throughout the 2 weeks, and we would make more money, and hunters would have more opportunity to turn their deer into us to process. But because of the way that they've jammed this together, he said by like Sunday afternoon, our cooler was full. We couldn't take any more deer. And that's what happens if you're a guy who then shoots a deer and you don't know how to process your own deer. You can't find a processor to take it. It's like, and Carter and I ran into a similar situation. But like, we can't bring a deer back from Ohio to Pennsylvania because of CWD risk. So you either have to debone the whole thing, which is what we do in Kansas. And
it's mainly what, the brain and the spinal fluid?
Spinal cords, but it's anything. Like, you need to completely debone the deer, basically. And skull cap, no brain matter, no anything like that.
Right.
Well, we shot that on Monday evening. So by the time, like, he had to get back to school, like, I didn't have time to process it. Normally I would. So now I've got to drop it off at a processor before I cross over into, in this case, West Virginia. And so I find a processor. They're like, we're getting so many deer, we're done taking them at 6:00. He shoots that deer at 4:15. The processor's 45 minutes away, and I've got to have it in there for 6 p.m. If I don't, I can't take that deer across state lines legally. What am I going to do? Just drive around till I find another processor? Like, you are the inconvenience.
What's your point?
Well, what my point is that the states are not adjusting their seasons and opportunities with how we've advanced as hunters. And that's weapons, that's whatever, cell cameras, knowledge of bait and how to use bait, tree stands, box blinds. I don't care what it is. We have advanced as hunters, and the state basis, the state bag limits, season dates, opportunities, etc., have not changed. They've not evolved with this evolving. So what's happening is, I think, we're abusing the resource. Whether anybody wants to repeat it or not, there's no doubt in my mind that, especially with COVID, and they can not talk about it, it doesn't matter. We are absolutely, in the last 3 seasons, overtaking the resource. Whether it's access on public land or deer harvest in general, there are more hunters in the woods who have more time to hunt, who have more effective weapons to kill with. We are abusing the limited resource. That's it. You can argue, you can try to make an argument against it, just like most of these states when they're like, I don't know if there were more hunters after COVID. Get the hell out. Are you shitting me? Have you been in the woods lately? I mean, you and I talked about that when we got back from Illinois. We have never seen so many people. And then it's like, well, maybe it's just Illinois. Well, then you talk to people who hunt there all the time, and they're like, no, dude, it's freaking nuts.
Right. Well, that's what, that's what's so confusing is, like, I think it seems like all the state agencies or all the statistics that you see.
Recruit.
Yeah, we're still like, we need. But I mean, dude, in my gut, I'm like, we got too many freaking hunters.
See, that's what I don't understand. It's like we have been on this retain, recruit, renew for, I don't know, a decade plus. Like, it's the only message that any state wants to do is we're losing hunters. We're hemorrhaging hunters. We're going to be the minority. Listen, we're always going to be the freaking minority. We're never going to be the majority in the states. There will always be more anti-hunters than regular hunters.
Well, and it seems like the reality is, like, if we ever are the majority, which we could be approaching,
there's no resources left.
There's no resources left. Exactly.
So
who wants to deer hunt where everybody deer hunts? There's nothing left.
And I'm all for continuing to educate kids and get more kids involved and stuff. But with that, you have to look at the bigger picture, which is the total number of hunters in these states. There's not enough, and maybe it's like, well, we've got so much public ground. Cool, but most of those hunters used to hunt private ground that no longer is available to them, so now they're on public ground, and now you're over resources on that public ground.
Why were you saying earlier that the leasing is a touchy subject?
So, because I think that most people absolutely hate that leasing is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be, yes, I've leased and I still lease, but I'll also say that the majority of land I hunted growing up was either public or by permission. I didn't own land. It was always by permission or public.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
yeah, me too.
But all of those by permission properties are gone. They've
been leased
or were built up into a subdivision or whatever.
I don't know if they've been leased or just as many. People are just worried about liability.
Yeah, which I can't blame them. 20 years ago, I was building tree stands out of 2x4s, and like the landowner would be like, "Hey, I saw your tree stand up there." Like,
he's like, "Want a beer?"
Yeah, like they didn't care, right? Now because like I could stub my toe on a corn stalk and I'll sue you for $1 million. Like, again, how this society has changed. We have not adapted the base rules. This is why, so when people talk about like the North American wildlife model, right, it is still the best model in the world for how to manage wildlife. However, that model hasn't evolved in like the last 5 decades, basically. And we have tremendously as hunters and as equipment and as ability to kill. And so if your base model hasn't evolved in 5+ decades, how is it relevant in today's society? Especially when that base model was firmly developed on a lot of public access and open private lands, which are now privatized. I mean, at one time people criticized Texas because it was like 99% privately owned. Well, dude, even though Pennsylvania's got a lot more public land, I would say the private land, there's very few places that anybody can just go hunt unless it's part of like the Game Commission co-op program. Mm-hmm. Other than that, it's leased or shut down. Mm-hmm. Period.
Which seems like a kind of a cool opportunity, like the private land access stuff that those programs provide.
Like in North Dakota, that's the only way we can hunt.
Right. I think I'd like to see I mean, are there any potential issues with that you see?
I would, so this, going back to leasing, I would rather see states invest more money into that program for public access than privatize leasing.
Yeah.
And you know what? The farmer doesn't give a shit. He doesn't care if his money comes from the state or from this guy. The problem is
money, though, right?
Well, the problem is this guy's paying $30 an acre and the state wants to pay 10.
Well, and the reality is, like, you will have guys who are willing to pay more money to lock things up.
Absolutely.
That just will always happen. That's
absolutely
capitalism. Is that capitalism?
Sounds right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it has definitely created a resource issue. So now we're at the same bag limits. We've got liberalized seasons. We've got more weapons involved in the state of Pennsylvania, but hunters in the state have less places to go.
Yeah.
So your public lands that were probably still hunted pretty damn hard are now pummeled at this point.
Well, I think the difference is at one time they were hunted 2 or 3 days out of the year, like with fairly ineffective methods, like, drives.
Sure.
And I say ineffective, not at killing deer, but at killing mature deer.
But guys were in and out. 2-3 days,
in and out.
Rifle season, in and out, gun season.
It was sustainable, I think, by the resource. But now, you have potentially slightly fewer guys total, but spending
way more
all
time.
archery season, and in states like Ohio, granted, you can't bait on public land, but yeah, whatever. But dude, I have a kind of I don't know, an issue or just like a qualm with the, because I know you're very much about like the firearm history and the heritage, and I am too. Like I value that a lot. I don't at all want to see that diminished in any way. But every time we talk about it or it comes up, it seems like it's at odds with quality deer management.
It is.
And I don't think that it has to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fine line.
In the same way that, like, the state hasn't necessarily evolved in its regulations, I think that, like, a lot of hunting groups have not evolved to acknowledge that, like, better deer hunting practices can be put in place, and you can be successful and you can build as many memories.
Well, yeah. Well, I think one of the interesting things is, and there's probably a lot of people, maybe even listening to this, but a lot of people out there, goes back to how many people shoot a deer in rifle season or gun season that they passed in archery season. They pass it in archery season because they're like, I'm waiting for this guy. And then all of a sudden, we're now into the last part of November or December. The horizon's in front of us. And it's like, well, am I going to eat my tag or am I going to shoot this? That goes back to that remorse piece. I'm not saying that you're not grateful for the deer and you're not excited, but you had passed that deer for a reason. Now you're going to take it with an easier method.
Well, that's what I'm saying is it's a negative because you have like the pressure of now you're in this deer camp and now you have, and it's a good thing, like the camaraderie, the encouragement, but it's like, it doesn't change the fact that like you passed on that deer in archery season.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't change that fact.
Mm-mm. No, and again, there was a reason you passed that deer, and now you decided to shoot it with an easier method of harvest. Why? Because it's pure, and you can argue it. It's because it's purely later in the season. Your time's running out.
I don't know, man. I don't know if it's a matter of like will or discipline or just time or perspective or education, but it's like I just can't get on board with. Well, so killing a deer just to kill a deer.
Where I'm at odds on it. So go back to my tradition. Again, I grew up hunting rifle season with 15 guys in a deer camp, and you went out, and I learned hard lessons, man. I still have memories of like I shot a 7-point opening morning. It's like super windy. I'm in the stand. Set like a whole bunch of deer come up through this like hillside. 7-point comes out. It was my second buck, maybe. Mm-hmm. Shoot this 7-point, drop them, and I'm like, man, that's awesome. Like immediately after I shot, like at that time, like a very large 8-point comes up, stands 10 yards under my tree stand, and it's like shit. Yeah. Like had I waited 10 more seconds, maybe I see him. Yeah, but like my dad used to say, those are the lessons that teach you. Like, don't shoot that deer if you want to shoot a bigger deer, right? You shoot the first deer you see, the odds are you're not going to get a chance at another deer, that could be bigger. And so, that mindset evolved, where now I have like a little bit of a weird feeling about it. So Carter and I go to Ohio for opening day. We get there Sunday night and stuff. And, my goal for him, he shot a 4-point in Pennsylvania a couple years ago. He wants to kill a buck bigger than he shot last time. And it's not necessarily size bigger, but like, okay, I shot a 4-point. I want to kill at least a 5-point. Cool, man. But I go out there, whatever deer comes in, like just shoot it. I don't care. Yeah. Like if it makes you happy, shoot it. You're 10 years old.
Yeah.
And, so he has 2 opportunities at pretty nice bucks on Monday morning, but both were moving pretty quick, far, it as it would be. We talked about it. It's hard to get deer in scopes when they're moving like that, especially for a kid. And so it didn't work out. Like 4:00 that evening, this buck comes off this hillside, works right down into our food plot, 70 yards. He shoots it, drops it. And like, it's, 1-year-old 7-point, but awesome deer. Like he's stoked. I'm jacked up about it. The best shot he's ever made on a deer. Just folded this thing. And like that experience and that camp atmosphere was like really cool. Like that's what that's building the memories and reminiscing. And like from a management side, obviously like there were other deer I would have rather him shot than like a really good quality 1-year-old. But it's one deer in the herd.
Yeah. No, it's totally fair. And I'm not at all saying that like quality deer management should trump that situation at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's probably ways to to allow for that.
Mm-hmm. But it's the hard part about deer management is like managing deer is not hard. It's managing people.
Yeah, 100%.
And
well, dude, I was just thinking about like the antler restriction in Pennsylvania.
Great example.
That's a perfect example of the state
stepping in.
To me, that's the state saying, no, it's not what you're going to say. It's the state stepping in and saying to all hunters, y'all are too dumb to know if a deer is 3 years old or older. So we're just going to say if it has 3 points on a side. Okay, so there's the level of competency. It's like if the state were to say, okay.
And people still can't count.
And, people still mess up. If the state would come and say, okay, listen, in order to be able to, to qualify, whatever, to hunt in certain lands or in certain seasons or whatever, you have to be able to identify an age class of deer within a year. Okay.
Can't do it.
Yeah. I mean,
people can't even count points. Give credit where credit's due.
That's the state calling deer hunters idiots. Is what it is to me.
The state of Mississippi has implemented a main beam or inside spread restriction.
Or, listen, if they're not calling you idiots, they're admitting that the weapons that they're allowing to be used are too deadly at too far away.
Probably. Yeah, it's but here's the other side of that antler restriction piece is everybody. I mean, there were very few people in favor of antler restrictions in Pennsylvania. I mean, riots. Gary Alcott got death threats.
Why was that? You think what was the main reason?
Just change. Yeah. Don't tell me what to do.
Don't tell me what to do.
Big government type thing. Yeah, I want to do whatever I want to do.
Which I get. I understand.
But 5 years after that, people are like, holy shit, we're seeing like big bucks. Now here it is 20 years later. I mean, people are killing 200-inch deer in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that they never did kill 200-inch deer, but it was a super rarity. The consistency of really good 3- and 4-year-old deer in Pennsylvania has dramatically increased.
I mean, dude, it's not a hard thing to get big deer. Anywhere that has deer could have big deer.
Just got to get them older.
You just got to get them older. That's all there is to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Screw genetics.
Yes, there's a genetic element. Yes, there's a food element. Anywhere there's deer, there could be big deer.
Just has to be anywhere. Age. Number one.
Age.
Yeah. No places in the United States, minus maybe a few, are lacking genetic quality. The quality genetics are there. Odds are that deer will be an 8-point at maturity. That's how they're built. Period.
I think that the genetics are so, unless you have a hyper-controlled, like, high-fence environment, they're so intermixed anyway. I mean, do you think about just people? You walk out on a street, like, you have super attractive, blonde hair, blue-eyed people, and just as and totally the opposite.
I will say that I think that...
Right there living together. Cats and dogs.
Cats and dogs living together. Mass hysteria. It's a great movie. And there probably are biologists out here that would slap me for it. I do think that on a localized level, there are better genetic properties than others. And I know people will be like, that's bullshit, blah, 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 blah. Here's why. Like there are properties, if I'm running cameras, for instance, this new Kentucky place I have, one of the first things I noticed is I had multiple 10 points on camera. Well, normal deer are going to be an 8 point at maturity, and an 8 point most of their life at 2, 3, 4 years old. So the fact that I'd seen multiple deer on the property that were 10, 9 or 10 points tells me that that trait of more points is common on that property and in the surrounding properties. Now, flip a switch, my place in Ohio is mostly 8 points. There's some big ones, but they're mostly 8 points. And so are those deer genetically different from a significance level? Probably not, but there are traits that are expressed in those areas that are absolutely different. And if I'm thinking about antler quality, 10 points are usually going to score higher than 8 points. That's just how it is. The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Stealth Cam.
Dude, where would we be without our cell cams?
I would definitely be divorced at this point.
Yeah, I hear that.
I mean, the fact is I spent more time checking cameras than I actually did hunting prior to cell cameras. Now, at least, my wife can enjoy me being in the comfort of my own home, buried in my phone, checking those pictures.
Yeah, 100%. And dude, when it comes to trail cameras and definitely cell cameras, reliability is, I think, the number one thing that we're looking for. Stealth Cam just has a long reputation of reliable cameras, and ultimately that is the most important thing to us. They have to work.
In terms of reliability, there's not a better camera on the market than Stealth Cam, whether you're talking about the Fusion X, the Reactor, or the DS4K Transmit. And most of them are under $200.
Stealthcam.com. Check them out. I haven't seen that. Everywhere that I've seen good deer also have crappy deer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I would say, like, on your property, like, obviously, because it's the common peak, you're going to have 8 points on that property at maturity.
We've had plenty of deer that I'm fully confident at 5 years old would score in the 180s. 100%.
Yep. And most of those probably had more than 8 points.
Absolutely, they do.
But there are certain properties that...
But I also have a lot of deer that won't ever score over 130 inches.
Mm-hmm. That are just
5, 6,
8
7
points,
years old.
Straight 8 points.
I feel like I've seen that pretty consistently. Even on the places we hunt in Kansas and stuff, you have some really good genetic deer and you have some junkers.
And you'll always have those outliers. But from a trait standpoint, for instance, what's the one trait that we always talk about on your property?
Good brow tines.
Good brow tines. That is not...
But I have several deer that
shitty brow
don't
tines.
have brow tines.
But those deer are on the outliers. Most of your deer, I think, have good brow tines. That's a dominant trait on your property.
Yeah.
Just like if you ever see a piebald or an albino, like that's a trait expressed on the property. That's an actual, it's called phenotypic, but that is a trait that's expressed on those. So number of points for most deer is going to be 8. That is what they're going to have. But if you have a higher trait prevalence of 9 and 10 points, that's a great property. That property has potential to be fantastic. Now, what you still need is age. So you could have a shitload of 2-year-old 10 points. You need to get them to 4 or 5 or 6.
Sure.
And that's the harder part. That's why age is so much more important than any other genetics, nutrition. Doesn't matter. Like, they could be living in a Christmas tree farm. I don't give a shit. If you get them to 5 years old, they're going to be a big buck. Mm-hmm. So, those are the things that I think people get wrapped up in, that ultimately they focus on things like genetics, you and I know, not necessarily from a quality of deer production, but from a pure sightings and availability, food is critical, especially at this time of year. You'll listen to this, it's second week of December.
They'll find it, though.
But if you don't have it, you don't have deer.
Right.
That's
they'll
it.
find it. Like, this is what I mean. It's like if there's deer in the area, if they get old, they can get big, because if they're there, they have some means of finding food.
Yep. But if you're hunting a property, 40 acres, 140, 400, doesn't matter. If you don't have food right now, like standing grain especially, or a decent brassica plot or a corn pile, you don't have deer. Mm-hmm. They're not there. They're moved. They're gone. They're over where food is.
Yeah.
And so there are aspects of things that you have to bring in. And that's where the quality management or deer management in general piece is so weird, because I could have a shitty piece of property, a shitty 40 acres, and I can go drop a corn pile in that middle of that shitty 40 acres. And because you manage your property out the wazoo on 2,000 next to it, I'm going to benefit, because those good quality deer are going to find my corn pile on my shitty 40 acres and I'm going to kill them.
For sure.
And that's what I think people have such a tough time comprehending is, like, I've seen plenty of deer get killed on really shitty properties that are big deer, but it's because the neighboring properties have the quality. They just happen to luck out and be in the neighborhood of where they're at. And those deer don't know property lines.
No. Yeah, they have no idea.
No idea. And that's what happens.
Let's go back to I want to run through that corn pile versus food plot argument.
Let's do it.
Not
the same.
Yeah, so I mean, I disagree. First, I mean, perfectly willing to like hear the argument, but like
lay out some points. Let's go.
I think basically what we see, and we started talking about a barrier to entry. Just generally, like if there was a stance on deer hunting in general, I would be in favor of things that make deer harder to kill because I value the species, the challenge of the hunt. I want to see a mature age structure. It's just what I want to see.
Well, and also
and I know it's harder to plant food plots than it is to dump a pile of corn. So
and I think
that's my argument.
Yeah, and I think most people and this is where I will agree with the public land guys. They get satisfaction out of it being harder to kill a deer on public land. That is the argument for most of those people. If you talk to somebody who says, well, why would you hunt public land over private land? I like the challenge.
Yeah, and like I want it to be attainable though. Like
sure.
I'm not saying it should be illegal to. I mean, that is literally the argument. I would say it should be illegal to dump corn piles. It should not be illegal
to plant a food
plot. I want it to be possible, and I realize that increases your chances of having a successful deer hunt. But it takes considerable effort to do it. So that's one thing, barrier to entry. Not only does it take effort to do it, it also is contributing something to the property and to the deer herd that you're hunting.
Year round, usually.
Year round, regardless of the time frame, essentially, as where a corn pile is not. You know, frankly, it's probably taking them away from a higher quality food source.
Well, it's damaging.
Away from higher quality, habitat where they're surviving from predators.
Well, and you're putting deer in a congregated area that's destroying native habitat. Where if you have a feeder in the middle of woods, and let's say you have greenbrier and blackberry and browse and stuff, that will be gone, right? You draw those deer into that area, it will mow down the native habitat, it'll destroy it, and then also you have a disease implication because you're putting so many deer in a tight area. And people say the same about food plot, but an acre is different than 10 square feet. Yeah,
that'd be the third one, I think, is whatever you call it, disease, but also, the social stress that those types of situations put on deer. I just think it's super unhealthy. It's not natural. I just don't think you can make that argument about a food plot. Like I think it's either going to get eliminated. Like if it's too small, like in terms of size, you can say, okay, a corn pile's 5 feet by 10, whatever, 5 feet by 5 feet. If I plant the same size food plot, it'll be gone in a day. And so it's like an irrelevant argument.
Well, and I mean, let's keep in mind that from a nutritional value, like carbs and some fat in corn, but there's like no protein, less than 6%. So
protein. How do we feel about feeding? Like what if it's a good quality feed source?
In terms of like a protein feed and stuff? I think you still have the same issues of you're going to destroy native habitat wherever that feeder is. It's
still a disease element.
You still have a disease
still
element.
The social stress.
Yep. But I don't think that you have as much of an issue around the quality of forage. Because here's the thing. Like most creatures,
it eliminates the quality of forage argument.
Yeah, so just like a corn feeder, or I'm sorry, corn field. Like people say, well, that deer just eats corn. No, it doesn't. From the moment it gets up to the moment it comes back to bed, it's browsing. It's eating native, high quality, forbs, browse, whatever. And yes, it's consuming corn. But when you put an unnatural bait pile in an area that maybe traditionally a deer would not occupy because there isn't winter food there, but now they are occupying it, literally deer can starve to death by just consuming corn. There's not enough protein in that to continue daily metabolic functions. That's a fact. You can argue it. It's a fact.
It is an interesting question, though. Like if you swap corn piles with a high quality, a protein source or feed source.
Which I do. Transparently, I will, especially in after season.
It's interesting how that changes how I feel about it because
you still have the same impacts from social stress, from disease, and from localized native habitat damage. But from a contribution to the deer's nutritional system, like you're not necessarily going to like the deer aren't only going to eat protein feed.
Well, and just transparently, I don't like the social stress and these other things. I think are tolerable. It's not like my biggest issue with
disease is a big thing that we overlook.
It is, and yeah, I mean that could quickly become a big issue. But like for me, it's more about the ability to go and do something that your neighbors aren't doing, and yeah. So I think, as much as I think like a quality protein food source could add value to the herd, it still doesn't seem fair to force that on neighboring properties.
I will say that like if in a hunting situation,
and in fairness, I mean the counter to that could be food plots. A guy who doesn't plant food plots, doesn't have the resources, could say, well, it's not fair that this guy can plant food plots and I can't, because there is a level of attractability of food plots. That absolutely is true.
Well, and from a cost effectiveness standpoint, food plots are way more cost effective than continuing to put out supplemental feed.
No doubt.
And again, though, as a biologist, I will tell you that food plots are still supplemental in nature, right?
No doubt.
The native browse, especially at this time of year, is the majority of a deer's food source. I don't care if you have standing grain or you have a food plot, browse will still make up 60+% of that deer's diet.
Yep.
But go back on that feed. So, like, again, in a hunting situation where legal, I put out shell corn. I got nothing to hide on that. In my feeders, especially like in Kentucky, because I will feed not year round, but in those critical time periods. So like right now through March, and then I'll shut it off, and then I usually put some more in July and August. I feed a sweet feed mix, which has some cracked corn in it, but it's also got protein, it's got molasses, it's got some fat contributions in there. And so in my gravity feeders, my Boss Buck gravity feeders, I actually feed a sweet feed mix through the winter. Now, I do a lot of habitat cuts and I do a lot of food plots as well on that property to try to balance their diet, but they have that as a supplemental nutrition. Is it right? I don't know. Does it help them? I do think it does, especially in those really brutal cold snaps or if they get a heavy snow or an ice storm. I mean, it's really tough for a deer, in especially Kentucky where it sits, to survive in an ice storm, being able to eat browse and stuff. That I think is a major source. But again, purely supplemental in nature, not there to be the core diet for those deer. It's impossible.
Yeah, and the tough part about, like, because this is where it's like not enforceable, is like I would be all for anybody putting protein out. I think that's great. It's
expensive too.
But when you start hunting over it, I think is where it creates an issue.
Yeah, I mean there are plenty of places that you can supplemental feed in the off season, but you cannot bait during the season.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that either, because I just don't think that it's like being a guy your whole life and then just you know what I mean, deciding that you want to go swim for the girls' swim team, basically.
Son of a bitch.
It's essentially the same thing. Like the deer are there, they know the food has been there, they're going to continue to be there, looking for it essentially
for at least a period of time.
At least for a period of time, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things that I get the argument of the food plot versus baiting or supplemental feeding.
It's a tough one. It's not black and white.
Well,
we're trying to find a line of where do you draw the line of what's fair to deer hunters, what's fair to deer as
well.
The
what's the difference between me putting a food plot in and a farmer putting the soybean field in for deer from a deer standpoint?
Nothing.
So, I mean, you're going to tell me that farmers shouldn't plant crops
anymore?
Well,
I suppose it would be the intention. Intention has you plant a food plot with the intention to deer hunt over it.
But the deer don't know that.
No, they don't. From that standpoint, there is no difference.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't...
to my point of it's not black and white. Like, you got to draw the line
And it's not
somewhere.
easy. I mean, we've all had food plot failures where when it fails, you're screwed. Or the deer crush it and it's gone.
Yeah.
Whereas I can go and put a corn pile out whenever I've got time and it's in the back of my truck and it's legal.
Yeah.
There is no weather effects. There are no... Yeah, it's the corn pile can always be there.
Yeah. I guess where I struggle with, like, the main thing that I could struggle with, like, in this argument here that's come up has been, like, the the affordability. Like I guess I haven't thought about how I felt about this before now, but like I don't know how I feel about, you know, if somebody's like, well, I'm going to feed protein, it's going to cost me
it's expensive.
$10,000 a year or whatever. I don't know what it costs.
I know plenty of guys that feed year round, and I'm talking feeding like 30 tons.
Knowing that it is adding value and also attracting deer, you know, those things I'm okay with, but it's the knowing that the neighbor is then going to have to do that if they want to share in that success.
And I will say from that standpoint, especially in the December to March, early March timeframe, you are bringing an abnormally large amount of deer into your property because of that supplemental feed, and you are likely damaging your property. You are above where the winter resource level should be. That's going to happen because you're sponging them from other properties.
Yeah. There definitely are similarities, you know, between.
Same with food plots.
To make it cut and dry, the food plots and core plots, there's definitely overlap. They share similar attributes, but I do feel that they're drastically different in nature, mainly for the reason that we described.
Well, and I mean, not all food plots, because I plant plenty of annuals that are literally, it's a kill plot. I plant it to kill a deer on it. I also plant a lot of clover plots and things year round that I don't ever hunt over. Like, and you know, 90% of their growth cycle is during times of stress for deer when hunting season isn't open, whether that's in the late winter time or during the summer when they're fawning or growing antlers or whatever. And that's providing nutritional source. That's why we plant them, right? That is the point of a perennial or summer annual. Like, I know we've had the argument back and forth. Do you plant summer annuals or not? If you plant summer annuals, you may eventually hunt on them in November, December, but the majority of their cycle is in June, July, August when hunting season's not even open.
Yeah.
And it's providing resources.
So there's a big benefit, you know, to food plots when it comes to adding value, you know, to the property. And that's something that a bait station
can't do. Doesn't
necessarily offer, but that's where I think the question is kind of confused or clouded by the quality food source.
Here's the thing that I think, and it would go in order. Natural habitat being browse, forbs, etc. is number 1. Food plots being 2. Bait station being a distance 3 is dependability, right? When a deer is looking for a food source throughout the seasons, they're looking for dependability. Natural habitat, whether it's browse or forbs, is the most dependable depending on the time of season, and mast at that point, acorns. Number 2 is food plots. If a food plot is established and it's there until they eat it down to the ground. It's a slow transition of death, basically, in that food plot to where there is no more food in the food plot. Lastly is a bait station. Because if I don't get there for 3 weeks and I don't put corn out or I don't put protein out, there is no food. If a deer is dependent on that source of food for whatever reason and it's not there, they either leave or they die. So the dependability is what a deer is looking for in its food source, regardless if it's March or it's December. And of the 3, bait stations are the least dependable from a deer standpoint.
It's funny. You're exactly right. I think that dependability or reliability of a food source is critical. And also, I was kind of thinking about that when we were talking about like the quality food source, like if you're feeding protein pellets or whatever it is. It's like it almost seems like there should be some requirement to do so for a certain period of time if it's going to be allowed. It's like it either is allowed and you have to do it for 6 months at a time, or it's not allowed.
Well, I mean, a great thing that not all of us are familiar with, but if you're in the northern states in Canada, is these winter feed areas, right? So like in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, these deer literally cannot survive in some of these places. So the DNR will set up these winter feed yards that have whatever alfalfa hay or whatever else, and it has hundreds of deer come down into. If they stop feeding in those feed yards, the deer die, right? There's too much snow, too much cold, no food, very tough. So again, talking about dependability, there's a responsibility to provide that resource. This is why people talk all the time, well, you shouldn't feed deer in your backyard. Well, it's mainly because it's in the wintertime that people are doing that, and a deer becomes dependent. Like the more, all of a sudden you have food out, you have apples out, you have corn out, whatever. The deer becomes dependent on that and basically becomes brain numb to like, oh, I can just get up and come eat here. Eventually, that food stops because you're busy, you run out of money, whatever. And a nasty winter cold front comes through and drops a bunch of snow or ice or cold weather, that deer dies because it can't now say, oh shit, like where am I going to get all my food from? You have basically conditioned that deer to feed on a man-made source that you are responsible for putting out. And then again, why it's not a food plot, you just decide I'm not going to put it out anymore. Or I'm busy. That deer is now conditioned, and it's like, well, now what? What do I do now? Yeah. And it's got to pivot. And that's why like a lot of your button bucks and doe fawns and stuff that are stupid die, because they are very easily conditioned to that kind of food. And they're not necessarily conditioned to finding limited browse in the wintertime. And so they starve to death.
Yeah. I don't know, man. It's tough. Those are all very valid points, speaking to, to managing a deer herd. I think it just at a hunting level, like I would be in favor of trying to find a way that like leveled the playing field. I can see the argument for people saying, well, not everybody can plant food plots.
I think a lot of your public hunters would be for it.
For what?
Figuring out a way to level the playing field.
In what way?
By like removing corn piles.
Why?
Because they can't do it on public land. And if you can't do it on private land, that deer is probably maybe not equally, but definitely more likely to show up on public land than private land without a corn pile.
Right. Do you think that most of those guys would be, if they had a choice, would it be to make corn piles illegal overall or to make it legal on public land?
Illegal overall.
Illegal overall. Because anybody could go and dump anything anywhere on public land.
And I think it's a culture standpoint. Those guys who have hunted public land in Ohio forever never have used a corn pile. So
can you imagine if baiting was legal on public land? Like, talk about ruining a resource. Like, if it's not close already, it's like that'd be it.
That'd be the end.
That'd be the it.
Yeah. So I mean,
that is sad, because I think from the state's perspective, like there will always be people that are fine with that. They're like, yeah, public land, fine. Yeah, I'm gonna shoot a four corner. They're but and no disrespect at all. I think those people don't have the perspective on what deer hunting could be.
Well, it's because
if it weren't for those things,
and I'm not saying this disrespectful. Deer hunting's not a priority in their life. It's just a thing they do. Just like they watch football on Sundays, or they go to the bar, or they go to a concert. It's just another thing in life. It's not their passion. It's not what they, consume themselves with. And I'm not saying that's necessarily healthy, as we have discussed.
Well,
but
and it's a tough like stance too, because like that's it's as much as I want to selfishly say, man, I wish deer hunting was exactly what I wanted it to be, and I want, that's just not reality. Like, and the world doesn't revolve around us, as deer hunters.
And I mean, I've commented in the past, not on this podcast necessarily, but I'm a transparent guy. I've absolutely voted and pushed for the increase of hunting license costs to choke people out.
Sure.
The people who buy a hunting license and hunt one day, I'll pay for them.
Right.
Like, tack that extra $50 onto me. And that pisses a lot of people off. I'm sure people listening to this will be pissed off by that. Mm-hmm. And in theory, it's not the right way, mainly because the federal dollars from Pittman Robertson don't work out that way. You need numbers of hunters as much as you do dollars from license revenue. But, I've openly said that mainly because of frustration of hunting public land, where it's like, I've hunted and scouted and done everything on public land the entire season. I'm back in on my spot, and at daybreak, Elmer Fudd comes punching through and sits 15 yards from me. Even though I'm whistling and basically waving my arms at him, he gives two shits, because this is the one day a year he blows the dust off the gun. And I don't care if you get pissed off about that you're a piece of shit. If I walk in on a guy, the first thing I say is, fuck, I am sorry. Like, and I immediately turn around and follow my tracks right out.
Not that you did anything wrong. It's public land, but once you realize there's somebody else there.
It's morals. It's ethics.
I respect it.
So the dude who comes in and sits 15 yards, and I would assume most people listening to this who hunt public land have experienced it, and has seen you, has acknowledged you, and still going to sit his ass there, he's a piece of shit.
Yeah. I've lost a lot of arrows that way.
Yeah, and I don't want him in the woods. So if I have to pay the extra $50 to kick his ass out, all for it. And that's just the way I feel about it.
And it's that's where I'm saying it's tough, is because like I don't want to price anybody out of hunting. Like there's plenty of good ethical hunters
Sure.
who might not have the money to and so I have a tough time.
I agree.
And I know you do. Yeah, I know you do too. Like I don't want for that to
but
be
I
the
also
case.
value my resource. So for instance, I think you can buy an adult hunting license to kill a buck in Pennsylvania for $26. $26.
Right.
$26.
Yeah.
To kill what I cherish as a very valuable resource in this state.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's insulting.
Yeah. But anyways, I mean, yeah, I think we've said our piece there on the the corn pile situation. Yep. And not that we're above it, Frank. I think we're more than anything disappointed that it feels like we have to be a part of it.
Yeah, I don't like doing it. It's against how I grew up hunting. It's against my kind of knowledge as a biologist and as a deer manager. But I also know that if I don't do it, like in Ohio, if I don't do it on my Ohio place, like I know those deer are going across to my neighbors and they don't have the same standards I have.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's where it's really crazy. Because like if again I knew my neighbors would pass these 2 and 3 year olds that I'm passing, then maybe I wouldn't do it. But I know that they're going to shoot them.
Right.
So I'm almost and it's not.
Yeah, it would be equalized by everybody having the same standards. But at that point, it's like how do you make exceptions for kids or whoever?
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there's neighbors in Ohio that probably didn't want Carter to shoot that 1-year-old 7-point, but that was what we were looking for. So, yeah, it's a tough thing. I think when you get to the standards aspect of it, and the standard, this is where the divisiveness. Like I know we took shit for that for a while, but the hunting community will always be divided. And it's because expectations and standards will always be different. There's no way everybody's going to have the same expectations. There's no way everybody's going to have the same standards. That's just part of it.
Or opportunities. I mean,
opportunities. Yeah. So I mean, there will always be divisiveness. I'm not saying that in a a extremely harsh negative way. I'm just saying the community will always be divided. Because guys who shoot recurves and longbows will always look down at compound guys who will mostly look down at crossbow guys. Mm-hmm. And that's just how it is. It's not saying that any one of those guys is wrong because it's a legal method of harvest. It's just these are standards that are different. Thus, we're divided. What you can't have is you can't have people doing things illegally. And you can't have people abusing the resource because those are the two things that will end hunting.
Well, and the problem here is it seems like some of the laws are allowing for abuse of the resource.
And that is one of the number one ways that hunting will end in this country is if we continue to abuse the resource, eventually the resource won't be there and we won't have hunting.
But either that or it'll become 100% privatized because enough people realize that the state can't manage the resource, so they manage it on their own, and they buy up or lease up all the land.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
Yeah, and there will be public land available. It will just be pounded to the point where the deer know there's no property lines. They'll go away from that. Mm-hmm. They won't be there because why would they? They get killed.
Yeah.
They get pressured. So, yeah, I mean, do I worry about divisiveness of hunters ending hunting? No, I don't, because I think there will always be divisions in hunting. Do I worry about the abuse of resource ending hunting? Absolutely. And that's access, and that's the whitetail deer population, or turkeys. Or I mean, look at how many people bitch this season about turkeys in the Midwest and not seeing anything. That's a resource issue. Mm-hmm. What's causing it? I don't know. Disease, overhunting. I don't have an answer. Deep fragmentation of land. I don't know. But that resource is what will end turkey hunting in the Midwest, not divisiveness of do you use a bow or a ground blind or do you reap or that's not going to end hunting, but the resource will.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
Cool. All right. We're done ranting today. What is this one's probably airing December.
First week of December?
I think it'll be the second week of December.
Second week in December?
It'll be...
Yeah, that's right.
13th.
Right on.
Cool. Well, it's the late season. I don't know. It is a depressing time because we're starting to get into shorter daylight hours and stuff. I kind of like late season hunting because it's a little bit more straightforward in terms of I just hunt the afternoons.
If you have deer left.
If you have deer left, I just hunt the afternoons and on a food source.
Yeah.
That pretty much is what it comes down to. But yeah, I'm sure we'll still be doing some hunting here. Another few days of Ohio gun season, Pennsylvania gun season all next week, some muzzleloader seasons and things, and then obviously archery, late archery still going on. But we will keep you guys posted on some of that and keep sharing some of your harvests. It's cool to see that coming through Instagram and stuff. And we will see y'all next week.
Later.
Take me